I find that it's hard to talk to people about the paranormal, especially in the African American community. My first memory of the paranormal was waking up and seeing a ghostly woman beyond my bedroom door. I wasn't scared, but was curious as to what she was looking at. She was staring at the wall with a look of sadness. My brother and I shared a room, and I tried to wake him, but he wouldn't budge. When I turned my lamp on, she disappeared. That was one of the only times I have ever had a peaceful encounter with the paranormal. After that, it felt like I was being targeted. Why I was, I still do not know. At first, the activity in our house didn't seem malevolent. If anything, I got the feeling that whatever it was trying to get my attention. Every night, my arm would be pulled, dragging me from my sleep. My grandma told me it was my grandpa, who I'd never met, playing around. She said that if I was scared, I should tell him to stop. So, the next time it happened, I sat up in my bed and asked it to stop. Never was my arm grabbed again, and for a while, I got some rest. Before too long, the sleep paralysis began. I was helpless, and felt a darkness in my room each time it happened. I still shared a bedroom with my brother, he on the bottom bunk, me on the top, but I was never able to wake him during these experiences. Although I had never met my grandpa, I wondered if he was truly capable of scaring me so. I wondered if the presence I felt most nights was even him at all. At certain times of the year, sleeping on the top bunk, so near to the ceiling, became unbearable because of the heat. On those nights, I would go to the living room and sleep on the couch. Even there, I would be woken up, this time to the sounds of glass breaking in the kitchen and pans banging. When I turned on the kitchen lights, everything was fine. It felt like something was trying really hard to get my attention. Still, I told myself I was going crazy because nobody else heard the noises. My brother laughed at me and told me I was insane, but did agree to sleep with me in the living room one night anyway. The first night went off without a hitch, but the very next night, whilst I was deep in a much-needed sleep, my brother woke me up in a panic. "Did you hear that?" he asked. There was banging and clashing in the kitchen. As usual, when I flicked the light switch on, the kitchen was spotless. I was glad that I finally had a witness, although my brother and I never spoke of this again. We became busy teenagers and hardly stayed at home. My brothers all graduated and moved on. Because of that, they didn't get to witness the change our father was going through. But I did. He became alcoholic and verbally abusive towards me and my mother. He put dark trash bags over the windows to block out the sun and yelled at us for having the lights on. The only light he tolerated was the glow of the TV. Often he would sit in complete darkness, smoking and drinking beer. Everything about him changed. Even the smell of him changed. He started to smell of sulfur. I remember hating having my friends over after school because they thought my parents never paid the electricity bill. They could not realize that was how my father liked to live. Many times I would walk to my grandmother's house, which was only 50 yards from my own. There I could watch my favorite shows and sometimes eat dinner in a lit environment. The change in my father occurred after he took a trip down south to see someone he called a witch doctor. He would often talk about it, retelling the story with the same details. Supposedly, he and a few co-workers went down there because they had heard that the witch doctor had got another co-worker out of possible jail time for a crime he actually committed. To my knowledge, my dad never broke the law, so I'm not sure why he went. He never told us that. The only point he was always clear to stress was that voodoo and witchcraft is very real, and that my brothers and I should stay away from it. He said that on the way to the witch doctor they saw an anaconda in the middle of the road and ran it over with his work truck. After they hit it, he and his co-workers heard a loud scream, but they kept on driving. When they arrived at the witch doctor's place, the man they encountered already knew who they were and why they had come. He told them that they would have to pay double for having ran over his pet snake. My dad said he apologized and paid. He never said anything about what happened whilst they were there. However, he always ended his story the same way. On the drive back, there was a guy limping towards them in the middle of the road, forcing them to stop their truck. The guy was cursing at them, and my dad asked why he was so mad. The guy said, "I'm mad because you ran me over earlier." My dad told him there must have been a mistake, as they hit a snake earlier. He told me that after that the guy went quiet and stared at them with malice. A co-worker told my dad to drive away, and so they sped off. It sounds ridiculous, I know. As a kid, I laughed whenever my dad told us, and I still grin about it now, just thinking about it. But Dad never smiled when he told us. Not once. Within a year of his visit to the witch doctor, all of his co-worker friends who had gone with him were dead. All died in horrible ways. It was during this time that I was woken at night by my bed rattling. When I opened my eyes, I saw a massive werewolf-like figure at the foot of my bed. It had a massive torso, and its facial features kind of resembled my dad. I sat up both terrified and angry, and the entity fled in the direction of my parents' room. Surely this had been a dream. Whatever the explanation, it had been the last straw for me. After that, I slept with my friends and family members every chance I could. If I couldn't, I stayed up all night at our house. Nearly 10 years passed. After college, like most graduates, I struggled to make a living and had a massive school loan. Recently, my grandma had passed away and her house was unoccupied. It was the house my mother had grown up in. When she married my father, my grandma had a small house built on the property for my parents to settle down in. By the time I moved back, my mother had remarried. She still lived in my childhood home with her new husband. Living in my grandma's house by myself was a pleasant experience. My grandma had been a great human being, and I could feel the goodness of her energy in that building. When I moved in, there were times when I would wake up to the sound of her voice, calling my name. There'd be a smell of flowers in various parts of the house that would come and go. My niece, the great-granddaughter my grandma never met, would come to visit and make comments about Gran-Gran. She would say that Gran-Gran talked to her and would tell us things about how my grandma loved the remodeling. My niece would walk around and point out things I had changed in the house, even though she hadn't even yet been conceived when I had made those changes. But things did not stay like that forever. My oldest brother got out of the military and needed a place to live. He stayed with me for a bit, but we never had a great relationship, so my mom decided to let him move into our childhood home, while she and my stepdad moved in with me. I didn't like the idea, but I had no choice, because the property was willed in her name. The day they moved in, the shift in atmosphere was like night and day. You know how every house has a smell and a feel? When they moved in, the house smelled different, and tension filled the air. I had lived like a bachelor, meaning I didn't have pictures hanging, nor was I decorating every room. When my mom moved in, she put pictures and religious figurines in every room, even the bathroom. Yet, not once did that place feel homely to me again. The atmosphere was oppressive, similar to before I had moved away and still lived with my dad. But, in some respects, it was worse. I began having terrible nightmares in which I repeatedly witnessed the death of my family members. Then, dreams became reality. I dreamed of a poisonous snake in my kitchen sink, biting me, as I was pouring a glass of water after waking up, as I usually do. When I woke up from that nightmare, I went to the kitchen to get a glass, and was going to pour some water into it when something told me to turn on the lights. I did, and found a snake coiled up in my sink. Next, I would hear scratching on the walls. The scent of flowers was replaced by the stench of mold and urine. I saw shadows everywhere and constantly had the feeling of being watched. the house was infested with darkness. Was this darkness attached to me? When I left for college, I had no paranormal experiences. This made me wonder if it was attached to my mother. Had my father brought something into our house after visiting the witch doctor, which had now followed my mother? Whatever this darkness was, it seemed to feed on male energy. My stepdad became depressed and started acting similar to how my father had been when I was a child. He grew to love the dark. After about a year, he stopped sleeping in the same bed as my mother because she always kept the lamp on. Mostly, he slept in the dining room. The only light he tolerated was the TV, just like my father. As for my childhood home, where my older brother now lived, the atmosphere there was as polluted as ever. He liked the dark and drank a lot. He had poor hygiene and was belligerent. My mother explained his behavior as PTSD, yet I thought otherwise. It was the darkness, which now had a hold over both houses. Living as we did, as I had done as a teenager, was burdensome. I could feel the darkness all the time. After about a year after my mom and stepdad moved in, I went to California on vacation to get away from everything and everyone. I was in the hotel lobby using my laptop when an older lady tapped my shoulder and asked to chat with me. I didn't know who she was, but said yes. Immediately she told me she was psychic and began telling me things about my life that no stranger would know. She also told me that I had a dark aura surrounding me. She told me that someone I knew had put the darkness on me. She then took my hand and asked me to pray with her, and I admit that I did feel like a weight was lifted from my shoulders afterwards. But at the same time, when I returned home, it was like nothing had changed. One night I came home from work and went to unlock the front door to get inside. I could see the living room lamp on the inside through the glass and the thin curtain on the other side of the door. As I unlocked the door and turned the knob, something turned it back in the opposite direction. I looked up again and saw the silhouette of my stepdad on the other side of the door, holding the knob. At first I thought he was playing around and laughed, but it went on longer than it should. I began to get irritated and went to the side door of the house. In doing so, I passed by the window which looked into my parents' room. Both my mom and stepdad were inside. He was asleep and she was on the phone. I went inside and asked her how long he had been asleep, and she told me for a few hours. Soon after this event, my bedroom became a hot spot for strange occurrences. I'd wake up to freezing temperatures during warm weather. Sleep paralysis returned, and I would see figures moving around my bed, shape-shifting. One night I was sleeping on my side when something tapped my head 3 times and growled in my ear. I could feel its cold breath and guttural voice in my ear. The 3 spots I was tapped on later turned into large boils that had to be removed surgically. As time went by, my health declined, and my nose bled all the time. My mother freaked out during one of my nosebleeds because I was on my 4th towel. The other 3 were soaked in my blood. She cried out that humans don't have that much blood in them. However, when I went to the doctor, I passed every test given to me. That same day, when I came back home, my stepdad was working on his car in the front yard. As I approached the house, he looked at me with confusion. I asked him what was wrong, and he said that he thought I'd let someone borrow my car because he thought I'd been at home. He told me that he had seen me watching him from inside the house. He was 100% sure it had been me because of its build and that it was wearing a hoodie. That night, while I dozed in and out of sleep, I was awoken once more. This time it was due to the feeling of electricity going through my body. I was paralyzed, but felt the current surge through my chest. When my eyes focused on my surroundings, I saw a large figure with a snake-like body and small arms hovering above me. It had a skeletal face and no eyes. I am not a very religious person, even though I grew up Southern Baptist and I do believe in God. I don't know who answered my prayers that night, but in my mind I called out to God, Jesus, my grandmother, my guardian angels and spirit guide for help. anyone who would listen. In my room, there is a window that faces me towards the foot of the bed. From outside, a light the size of a basketball appeared. It shined bright, then muted to a slow blink. Around the 7th blink, the dark entity vanished, as did the light. After that, I wasn't attacked again. The final encounter in that house happened whilst I was watching my mom and stepdad argue in the kitchen. It was the nastiest argument I've heard in my life. They were saying stuff to each other that was malicious, with the intent to cause harm. Sometime during that fight, I knew their marriage ended. I didn't need to step in because my mother was clearly the victor in this verbal battle. Even so, I kept close, as I felt this was one of those arguments that could lead to physical assault. What happened, however, not even I could have anticipated. A kitchen cabinet flew off the wall towards my stepdad, missing him by a few inches. The poor man screamed in fear and ran from the room. I was in shock, but my mom just laughed, saying it was Grandma protecting her house. Everyone who knew Grandma knew she wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone tear a kitchen cupboard from the wall and throw it at someone. Afterwards, I inspected the wall and saw how the cabinets were firmly mounted. Isaac Newton told us the rule of gravity says what goes up must come down. That heavy cabinet should have just fallen off the wall, but it had flown about 3 feet, as if someone from behind the wall had pushed it. That was it for me. I was done with the property for good at that moment. I found an apartment and moved in 2 days later. Today, my mum and I still speak about the strange things that occurred whilst we lived there, like the horrible deaths of all our pets, and how ravens would cover this one specific tree on the property and squawk at the house. I cannot explain the events that happened there, but I believe they are connected to my father's visit to the witch doctor. I once tried to put together a paranormal team and do an investigation at the property, but the new owner leveled everything down to the ground and turned it into a horse pasture. I never had the chance to go back there, but my mom recently told me that the owner had to move the horses to another place due to them being uneasy and sick all the time. Nowadays, I am much happier and healthier. I no longer have nightmares and my random nosebleeds have stopped. I refuse to go back to the property, even though my mom wants me to see how it's been converted into a beautiful horse farm. Perhaps someday I'll drive by and take a look, but I will never step foot on that property again. I encountered them when I was in missionary school in Hawaii. I joined right after graduating high school, thinking that I might experience something which would help me to decide my future and my faith. The school organized a great variety of lectures and classes, as well as taking students on missionary trips across the globe. I seemed so certain of myself at the time, but I know now that I was not ready for what was waiting for me. My sister had gone through the Southeast Asia evangelism course before me. She was always cheerful and smiling, a role model to me. I wanted to follow her footsteps. However, when I told her that I had volunteered to help people in Southeast Asia, as she had done, she looked worried. She told me that it was something to take seriously. It was like she wanted to say more, but left it at that for now. For the next 2 weeks, I attended lectures and cultural awareness classes in preparation for the trip. One night, my sister called me to meet her in a prayer room, as it would be quiet there and give us some privacy. My sister worked at the school as a member of staff by this time, so we hung out a lot, during which we'd chat and she'd give me advice. I figured that our meeting would be one of those sessions. When I arrived, she was sitting quietly in the dark room, praying to an opened Bible in the low candlelight. She did not even notice me as I walked in. Sensing the heaviness of the atmosphere, I instantly realized that she didn't call me just to have a conversation or a friendly prayer together. Something was wrong. I could hear her sobbing. After a while, she greeted me, wiping tears out of her eyes. I could see her face glimmering in the candlelight. When you see a person crying, you can usually tell the motive of the sadness. Why my sister was crying, I did not know. Thousands of questions were in my head, but I didn't dare to ask her. She was terrified. I mean absolutely terrified, enough to feel her shaking from a distance. She was trying her best not to show her fear to me, but it was obvious. My sister then told me to sit, which I did. A moment of silence passed between us before she spoke. "Do you really need to go there?" she asked. "Go where?" I asked back. I could see her face covered in fear again. "Missionary trip," she responded plainly. I then realized that her fear was due to the trip, which she had taken prior to me. Her fear did not make sense to me though. She always seemed happy and willing to share her experience of the trip to anyone who asked, never scared. In that moment she was terrified. She really did not want me to go, and not because of petty reasons like missing me and those sorts of things. I was leaving for Cambodia in a week's time and would be gone for 5 months. The trip would take me to Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. I calmly asked her why she did not want me to go, but she did not speak. She was choked with emotion, covering her eyes and holding back more tears. Finally, shaking and her hands making a fist, she began, "Look, when you go. I remember encouraging her to finish her sentence, but she never did. She ended the conversation by saying, "Just be careful in Thailand, okay?" She gave me a hug. I could feel her body was chilled. Even her tears, which now wetted my own cheeks, were cold. Over the next week, I asked my sister probably more than 100 times to tell me more, but she refused to talk to me about it. On the day I left for Cambodia, she texted me the following words: "When you see them, they see you." Them was a word often used in lectures to refer to evil beings, devils. Unnerved, I asked her what she meant by the message. She responded with an instruction laced with fear: "Pretend you do not see them." I laughed it off, even showing it to my buddy who was sitting next to me. We both laughed together, but I did save the text to my phone. My experience in Cambodia was amazing. I worked as a Korean lecturer, since Korean drama was very popular on the TV. I had my hands quite full, working and teaching people. Looking back now, I was definitely enjoying such a life, and was happy. It was exactly what I had hoped for the trip. But that experience did not last long when I heard we were being transferred to Thailand. We were going to be helping to build a church while staying in a motel owned by a private owner. My co-workers were happy about it, but all I could think about was my sister's final words to me and her text messages which she sent on the day I left. "Just be careful in Thailand, okay?" All I could see was her terrified face. I wished she had never said anything. I remember hating her for it at one point, as it unnerved me and was threatening to ruin the whole trip. After 16 long hours on a bus, we finally reached the motel we would be staying at in Thailand. It was an old wooden building, with lights run by loud generators installed at the back of the house. The building was shaped like the letter L, with the rooms divided by a hallway. In the middle of the motel was a shrine. It was a common shrine that Asian people worshipped every morning, clapping their hands and bowing their heads and such. I did not pay much attention to it, as I was more eager to find out if this building was safe, as it looked like it might collapse any minute and crush us to death. Our missionary work was to help build the church, which was about 10 minutes away from the motel. In the evening we would relax, pray, and share messages. 3 days passed without event. The whole time my guard was up because of my sister's words. I slept well due to the exhaustion of the physical work during the daytime. However, on the 4th day, I started feeling strange. I felt goosebumps when working, despite being covered in sweat from the heat and labor. I got a really big headache and had to take time out, sitting down with some water. I did not feel better. My leader told me my face looked terribly pale and I was probably being affected by the heat. They said I should probably head back to the motel and get some rest. I felt bad for leaving the work so early, but everyone seemed concerned and encouraged me to head back. so I started to walk down the road towards the motel, which stood at the end of the road. We were the only people staying at the motel, so during the day it was practically empty. It was incredibly quiet. Too quiet. There was something about the atmosphere that I cannot explain, a quietness that tells you something is off. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, I noticed the shrine and a person standing in front of it. The person was a girl, dressed in what seemed to be a white school uniform. She had her head bowed before the shrine. I thought she was the daughter of the motel owner. As it was a business relationship, he did not talk to us and we did not talk to him. Therefore, I had no reason to talk to her. I just started to walk down to my room, still looking at the girl in the middle of the yard. Then I noticed something. Her head, bowed before the shrine, did not come back up. At first I thought she was praying with her head down, but as I walked along the hallway, passing the shrine, I realized that her posture was a bit off. Her bowed head seemed strange to me, as though she had some kind of injury or disability. The angle of her bowed head was not normal. I slowed down to observe if anything was wrong. It was then that I saw it. Head to her shoulder, shoulder to her body, body to her legs, legs to her toes. One straight line and swinging. Her feet were off the ground, hanging. Her entire body was swinging front and back slightly in front of the shrine. My heart stopped and I was frozen. I immediately realized that it, was not from this earth. And that is all I remember. The next thing I remember was being woken up in a room surrounded by my team, asking if I was all right. They told me that they had found me collapsed in the middle of the hallway. I was distressed and still had a massive headache. The next day I was not able to go to the church. I just about managed to get up from my bed to look at the shrine from my room's window, wondering if it had just been a dream. I saw the motel's owner come to the shrine with some scents and fruits in his arms. I had not talked to him, but something told me that I had to, and that this would be my only chance to discuss with him. I calmly approached the man from behind. I did not know if he would be friendly or speak English even. Before I opened my mouth, however, he turned around and looked at me with a grin on his face. Giving him a proper greeting, I walked up in front of the shrine where I had seen the girl the day before. I started the conversation by saying how hot it was and told him about building the church. His English was not great, but it was conversational when taking it slow. We even managed a few jokes and laughs and enjoyed each other's company. He asked me how I was feeling, and I said a bit dizzy, but it was manageable. He smiled and said, "My daughter, sorry." The look on my face must have been amazing. He asked me if I was all right again. This time I could not even answer. The man let out a long sigh and showed me a picture from his old torn wallet. It was a photo of his daughter, smiling. I instantly doubted what I was seeing. It was that girl. It was the girl that was floating in front of this very shrine and swinging back and forth slightly. For a second I thought I had been mistaken and that she was alive. Before I could do anything else with that thought, he said, "My daughter died." My hopes were crushed by his short words. Next he made a circle with his hands, motioned his head through it, and made a choking face, explaining how she died. I will never forget the face he made. I started stuttering, trying to ask one of the many questions now racing through my mind. If she is really dead, I told him that I had seen his daughter in front of the shrine, and that she had been... I couldn't bring myself to say it. The owner's face was featureless. He just stared into my eyes before breaking out into a smile. His smile was so big that it stunned me. "I know," he said. After that, I did not have the courage to say anything else to him, or stay with him for that matter. I made my way back to the church to be with my group and share my story. The leaders looked stunned and separated me from the group to speak with me alone. They told me more about the motel. They had been in contact with the motel owner for many years. The missionary course has to find safe motels to stay and eat at, and he was a dedicated Christian who had welcomed missionaries to his motel many times. One day, his daughter committed suicide, hanging herself. After this, the owner lost himself, going somewhat crazy. He established the shrine for his daughter, saying that she would visit him and the shrine. He loved her so very much. He lost himself in his grief. After all this, I did not go back to that motel for any reason. I ended up sleeping in the half-built church, using a Bible as a pillow. I do not know why, but having a Bible around my head somewhat helped ease the pain of the headache I still had. I did have some nightmares. I was so traumatized by what had happened, and kept seeing the hanged girl in my dreams until I left that place. When everything was over, and we landed in Hawaii, my sister greeted me with open arms. I was eager to discuss with her what had happened before. Going back to the same dark prayer room as before, she straight away asked me, "Did you see her as well?" Thank you so much for watching. This weekend we will be helping out with the 4th annual charity telethon for the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. You can help support this wonderful cause by tuning into Twitch on the 16th and 17th after 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a special Christmas video which we will be sharing during the event. If you are interested in finding out more and sharing the Christmas spirit with those in need, links and more information are in the description. Thank you again, and please remember to like and subscribe for more of the paranormal. Remember, the more you know, the more there is to fear.